This podcast has been made possible by Ledge.
Hello, this is Chris Greiner here with Zeta Global, and you're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 914.
My big priority is to help make sure that we have our strategy and plan in place in a way that we understand, not just as a leadership team, but also as a company, to go out and accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. And it's lined up nicely for me because it's allowed me also as a relatively new member of the team to take what I'm learning about the business and bring that to the group in a way that we can use it to set that strategy and set that plan and set ourselves up for success.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Michael Bannon, CFO of Typeform. A quick glance at CFO Michael Bannon's bio reveals a familiar professional segue from his years as an investor with TPG Global of San Francisco to the operations side, where he has to date occupied the CFO office at 3 different tech firms. It's a resume any aspiring Silicon Valley CFO might hope to someday replicate. However, the fact is, Bannon launched his tech CFO career in London, where he recently opened his 3rd CFO chapter. While UK executive recruiters dutifully compile evidence to convince their tech management prospects that the UK is on the verge of becoming the next Silicon Valley, resumes like that of CFO Michael Bannon could well serve as Exhibit A. Our talk with CFO Michael Bannon begins after this. Does your finance team struggle with routine tasks like reconciliation and manually managing multiple bank accounts? Many tech companies today have complex finance operations and massive amounts of data in different disconnected silos. Whether you're reconciling across 6 different payment processors or between NetSuite and the bank, closing the books can be a nightmare. Ledge has found a better way. Ledge is a finance operations platform that connects all your banking, payment, and accounting systems into one unified platform. Ledge automates revenue reconciliation across all systems, right down to the transaction level, and instantly matches payments, invoices, refunds, chargebacks, or any other transaction. Ledge gives you real-time visibility into your cash position across all accounts and alerts you about issues and at-risk funds in real time, so you can act in real time. And get this, Ledge requires no engineering resources. Ledge plugs right into your existing stack, so you can get set up instantly. Ledge puts finance teams back in control. Learn more at ledge.co. Hello, we're speaking with Michael Bannon, CFO of Typeform. Michael, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, Michael, as always, we begin by asking our guests to look back for us. And what we're looking for are those experiences you feel prepared you for the CFO role. What would come to mind for you?
Sure. So I am now in my 3rd operator role. But I started my career in investment banking for a couple of years, and then I spent about a dozen years as an investor at a firm called TPG. And I think one of the things that probably prepared me most happened right when I became an investor, which was, I when I joined was well versed and well trained in building financial models and understanding numbers. And, I remember sitting in my first investment committee meeting, and I remember being well prepared if someone were to ask me why this number grew this much or what's happening at this margin line. And of course, the question that was asked of me was, what do you think about the business? And that was a question that I was wholly unprepared for. It was a different aspect of thinking about finance that I was entirely unfamiliar with. And it was an aha moment for me, which was, this is really about more than the numbers. This is really about more than the metrics. The finance side is here to help us understand the business and understand what the business is meant to be doing and how it's doing. And so I think when I took that lens over the course of my career as an investor, it really helped prepare me for the role I'm in now, because the role I'm in now, and I'm sure so many of your other guests have talked about, is really more than quote unquote just a finance role. It's helping the business understand how it's performing as a business. I think the other, bits and pieces that, I really look back on and value are, as an investor, I got to do so many really interesting things. I got to sit in on meetings. I got to meet people who built businesses. And, when I reflect back on that, I thought a lot about what was the part that I enjoyed the most. And the part that I enjoyed the most was sitting at the companies we invested in and working with them on how they were building a plan, how they were thinking about where they wanted to go next, and how they could use the finance side of things to inform it. And so, to me, the most informative experiences have been really using finance to think holistically about a business, and then really sitting with those companies to understand how we can drive them. I think making the move over to the operating side has been a lot about, figuring out a way to say not just that a company should grow this much more next year, but how. And that was the part that I got an incredible amount of value out of. And having had the chance to sit with a number of other CFOs and work with them to get there, I think has really helped me settle into the position I'm in now.
All right. Well, that's a nice overview for us. Thank you. I just wanted to ask a few questions about some of the different chapters. You graduate from undergrad and you spent 2 years.
Morgan Stanley for 2 years. Yep.
And then you jump to TPG. And then a few years in, you go back for your MBA. Do I have that right? And
you do.
Some finance leaders use it as a way to reinvent themselves. How did you look upon your MBA?
I looked at my MBA as an opportunity to explore. And so, I found that, and this isn't exclusive to finance, but I found that when you work in a business in a part of the world for a number of years, I at least found for myself that I started to think that all the smartest and the best and the brightest people worked in finance. And I knew, of course, that wasn't true. And for me, a lot of it was really understanding what else was out there. And so what I loved about business school was getting the opportunity to, find people who were a whole lot, smarter and had done all these interesting things. And it opened up my view of what was out there for me. I think also I used it as an opportunity to see some of these other places. So, my internship in between my 2 years of business school, of all places, I ended up in Kansas, where I was interning for Payless Shoes, if you remember them, because I had the opportunity to shadow the CEO for the summer. And that was an experience where getting to see what someone at that level within a company was able to do was amazing. It also helped me to see, what people at different levels of that organization were able to do. And I think when I put it all together, I knew that's where I wanted to go. I also knew that I probably had more to learn, and I probably had, more to understand about those sort of roles before I could jump into them, which is why I went back into investing. And it was another several years before I made the move to the operating side.
Yeah, no, it was quite an investment of time with TPG over the years. And what's interesting is when you do step into a CFO role, it looks like you're in the Bay Area, but you join a UK firm. Is that right?
It is. I would say it was both serendipitous and intentional. When I was looking to make the move to the operator role, I got very reflective about what I wanted to do. And for me, what I realized was important was helping to grow something and feeling like I was having an impact. Those were the two things that were most important to me. And so when I looked around at what that could mean, helping to grow something really, led me to go to an earlier stage business. I didn't want to go into somebody's seat where the person had sat there for a number of years and I was told, just keep the wheels steady and everything will be okay. I wanted to help build something, including my role. And the second piece is I wanted to come in a role at the organization where I felt like I could have an impact. In my previous roles, I felt like I had an impact, but it was at a smaller scale. And so when I put those two things together, it led me to earlier stage growth tech companies. Being in the Bay Area, my assumption was I would end up in the Bay Area. And when you have one conversation, it very quickly leads to two or three. One of the conversations I had was a London-based company, and for us as a family, we had also, always wanted to have an adventure, live somewhere international. And so these things lined up where, I joke a little bit that I made a career move and a geographical move at the same time, which can add a little bit of stress to things. But it's been great for me, and I think it's now 6 years that I've been over in Europe, and as an American who's based out in the Bay Area for close to 15 years, to now get to see the tech scene over in Europe has been a pretty special thing and something where I feel like I can be additive given my previous experience.
And again, everything you just shared with us kind of answers this question. But at the same time, there are other roles or other startups. This one was the adventure, I guess, that allowed you to step into the UK where you reside today as well. So we're 6 years later. I know while at Improbable, you did raise some money while you're there. Can you share any of that with us? I read a note
Yeah.
on your bio, LinkedIn bio.
Yeah, so Improbable is a fascinating company. It's a deep tech company, and there have been a few of those, obviously, over here in London. And one of the first things that I helped the company do when I joined was raise the Series B. So the company had raised a Series A, had some great investors in there, including A16. And we went out and we ended up raising $500 million from SoftBank back when SoftBank was really just starting to make their push. At the time, it was the largest Series B, at least in UK history, potentially in European history. And it was an interesting one because what the company was trying to do is take something called distributed compute, started in the gaming space, and then what the company was doing was looking at applications outside of gaming, commercial applications, government applications, to think about ways that they could use bigger and more distributed models. And so, I was their first ever CFO. That was intentional on my part. I wanted to go somewhere where I'd be the first ever CFO. It was a small team when I joined. I thought that was important for me getting into this side of the business because it helped me learn things from the bottom up. It helped me really get into the weeds of our ERP. It helped me really understand what it was to run payroll. It helped me really think through how to invoice customers, how to collect, how to do all these sorts of things. And so it was a great learning experience for me over those couple years, as well as helping the company grow, which we certainly did during my 2+ years there.
Is it a size company that you want to join? I mean, what's drawing you to these opportunities as you move on? You raise money, you help them grow, they scale from 200 to 400, and you move on. What's leading you along now?
Yeah, I think, for me, it's a few things. I love this size of company because I think there really is that opportunity for each of us here as an individual to have an impact. I've so far loved building teams, building organizations, and so far with the companies I've been at, we have grown pretty significantly over the period of time that I've been there. I've loved learning about different businesses as I've gone. So one of the things that I'm a very big believer in, particularly for this CFO role, is that the most important thing for a CFO is that the CFO understands the business inside and out. And so for me, what's also attracted me is the company and the opportunity. Joining Improbable was about deep tech, was about something I hadn't done before, but to help bring that business view and that business sense to what they were trying to do. MessageBird is in the communications market, CPaaS, omni-channel communications. It's a massive market. And especially with everything that's gone on over these past few years, the acceleration to digital communication has only continued. Really digging in and understanding what was driving that business historically, where we wanted to take it, was an awesome challenge that I got to be a part of. And obviously now it's led me to Typeform, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about here.
Well, that's some great detail, allows us to into your thinking somewhat. And I'll point out that you also got the title of president at MessageBoard, which is also a title you have as well today. But let's find out about Typeform then. Tell us about this company you joined just this year, early this year. Tell us about Typeform. What type of company is it? What does it do? What are its offerings?
Yeah, so I one of the things I'm challenging myself to do is stay away from buzzwords and jargon. I think it's a crutch that a lot of us use, and so let me try and describe what we do. And I love going back to the beginning. So Typeform is about 12 years old as a company, and what Typeform started, where it started was a company asked our two co-founders, who are two designers, to build them a beautiful and a different kind of survey to collect customer feedback. And our two co-founders, being designers, really focused on the design element, not just for the creator of that feedback form, but also for the respondent. So I'm sure many folks who are listening to this have used Typeform, whether they know or not. Typeform is a conversational tool for collecting data. So you can think forms, you can think surveys, you can think customer acquisition, you can think feedback, employee engagement. You can do so many different things with this tool. And really what it is it's an easy way for someone to be able to create a form. It's a low-code tool, and it's a way that you can create it in a conversational manner. So you'll see, if you've used it or you're familiar with it, you typically will enter your name, and then the tool will refer to you as you go through it. So for me, they would say, hey, can you tell us your name? I would write in Michael. It would say, Michael, thanks for taking our survey. There are just a few things we'd like to know, and we go from there. And it's always been very design focused. It's always been for companies who really want to give the respondent, the customer, their employee, whoever it is, that best possible experience. And it's been a fun one for me to learn about, because I think what you find is creators of these forms love the tool. It's easy to use. It's intuitive. They can be up and running in minutes. Respondents love this tool because it feels like they're having a conversation. It feels like a personalized interaction that they're getting with the company. And one of the things that drew me to Typeform is I found there are very few companies, particularly in this B2B SaaS space, where people love the product. And what's interesting, I'm just starting to get some of my swag now, but when I've stood next to a few people who have their Typeform shirts, people will come up to them and say, oh, do you work at that company? I love Typeform. And I think that's a really special thing about what we do. And I can talk more about the business itself, but it's this really special tool that's allowed businesses and their customers to have some terrific conversations over the past 12 years.
Very interesting. Could you take maybe a step back and offer us an abbreviated history of the company's capital structure?
Yeah, so the company started, and there have now been a few rounds of financing. So there was a early round, I'll call it a Series A, that you'd probably have to go back 7, 8, 9 years. There was a Series B that took place, I would say, about 5, 6 years ago, and there was a Series C that we raised around a year and a half ago now. So we've got some great investors behind the company. We've got we've got some great investors behind the company. I'm happy to go through them if you like, but we've got some great investors.
Are you still raising money? I guess that's what I was looking at. What stage are you, and will you be looking to raise money?
At the moment, we're in a very fortunate position as a business where, we've raised the money that we have. We've got cash on the balance sheet where, I would say from an operational perspective, we are now in control of our own destiny. So the great thing about being at a company like this is, we're able to push ahead. We're not reliant on having to go out and do some additional fundraising. And I think from our perspective, the organic growth opportunities that are ahead of us are big enough and exciting enough that that's where our focus is going to be.
So I do think it is interesting that each of these companies that you've been a CFO are sort of similar in weight class when it comes to human capital, perhaps, and you've grown them over each tenure you've had. Similarly here, and correct me if you look at the world differently.
No, I think they're similar enough. We can keep going. They're similar enough. Yes.
Certainly, you could have jumped to another weight class of company. I'm just wondering why. What is it that makes this weight class of company so interesting for someone like you with your background, who has you certainly have choices to go other places, and I'm not trying to say anything negative about any of the three companies you've been with, but what does it do for you? You keep on just saying how it's like you're the sweet spot for you. Why?
Because I think companies at this size haven't figured everything out yet. And I think what I enjoy doing and what hopefully I'm getting better at is trying to figure that out. Where should a company go? Where does a company want to go? Why? Why does it deserve to play in a certain market? And I think what I've tried to do is join companies where they've found, a degree of product market fit. But if you look at each of the past few companies that I've worked for, each of them, I think, has the same set of challenges, but also opportunities, which is there are 1,000 different growth vectors for each of them. And the good is, you can find growth in a lot of different places. The tougher part is it requires you to make some decisions and make some choices. And that can be a scary thing. It can be an intimidating thing. And what I gravitate to is helping try and figure that out. So, I also made the decision to not go even earlier because I want to make sure that there's a business there. But I love finding these businesses where they've created a business where there's a huge unlock potential ahead and where I can help shape what that might be.
In finance, we all think you're talking about capital allocation. You get to decide where some of that investment is going to be made to achieve that growth. How am I doing?
I think you're doing great. I probably approached it a little bit differently, though, which is, capital allocation is almost the last part of the conversation. The conversations that I try and have and be a part of are much more about the why. Why are we going to do a thing? Why are we making this decision? If it's the right decision, we will find the capital to go make it. I'll give you an example. At my previous company at MessageBird, we were an omni-channel communication company, are an omni-channel communication company. To be an omni-channel communication company, we want to make sure that as a business, you could talk to your customer over any channel. SMS, WhatsApp, voice, video, you name it. One of the channels the company was missing was email. And so the conversation was about how is the company going to bring email into the fold? Was it going to be through build, partner, buy? MessageBird ultimately decided to buy an email company, and we went out and had to raise the money to do it. So we acquired a $600 million email business, and we went out and we found the capital to go do it. And I think that's been more of the way that I've liked to have the conversations with, which is let's understand what we want to do and why we want to do it. We can go find the capital. If we've got the right compelling story, the economics are going to work. The payback is going to make sense. We're going to be able to tell this story, but let's really figure out the business side first.
That type of decision making, as you say, when you're examining the why, when it's flawed, and that's kind of a broad question, but when the decision making is flawed, what is typically responsible? Because it's relying on storytelling instead of data, because it's personalities who are influencing too much.
Yeah, I think it's potentially all of those things. The more I've done this, the more I've found that when there's been misalignment, it's been because people are looking at or don't have the same data in front of them. And so one of the things I've tried to bring, and my view is finance is oftentimes the brains of the organization, where it can bring the knowledge and the data and the rest of it to these kinds of conversations, is to make sure not only do we have it, but everybody has it. Because I think when everybody has it, it goes such a long way to eliminating any misalignment, and it gets you to the same decision. So I'll share a story with you, which is when I joined Typeform a few months ago, in one of our first leadership team meetings, there was a question about budget. And everyone in the room turned to me and they said, "Michael, can we do this? It's a budget question." And I took a moment and I said, I think the only reason you're asking me is because you believe I have information that you don't have. And so let me share the information that I have. Here's where we are against our budget. Here is what we're talking about. Here's the cost. Here's the potential payback. Here are the other projects and priorities that we have in flight. How do you think it stacks up? And put it back to the group, because in those sorts of situations, I think groups will make the right decisions when they have the right information. And one of the things that I've found in my role is it's not necessarily to be the decision maker. I think being the decision maker, it's not an overrated part of the job, but it's one that creates confusion. The part of my role is to make sure that the business, the company, has access to this information, because when they do, the company is going to make the right decision. And that's a much more scalable thing than any one individual doing it.
So tell us, are there approaches that you over time have adopted to help share those numbers, whether is it a dashboard? Is it just at company meetings being forthcoming like you described to us? So both your actions as well as dashboards or visual displays of something.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it is actions, and a lot of it is taking the time to go through it. What I've tried to do at each of the companies I've been a part of is to create the foundation and build from it. And so, a lot of this, again, is about understanding and helping the organization to understand. So in businesses like these, really helping people understand, where does it start? And I tend to be a linear thinker, but I also think it serves me well in my role, because we can start with, where does it start? It starts with our customers. It starts with, our customers, and let's think about what they're buying from us, and how do we get to ARR, and how do we get to revenue, and how do we work our way down the P&L? So a lot of it has been taking the organization along on that journey. A lot of it's been about creating the right, mechanisms and rituals, be it dashboards, be it weekly or monthly or quarterly business reviews, these types of meetings, so that we can bring everyone along on this journey, and so that hopefully we're all working from that same foundation.
Nice. So this is usually where we have the discussion around lines of sight, and this being a SaaS the business model, we'll expect it's all the typical unit economics. So we're looking for something different, something in the SaaS world that maybe you have come to rely on more, or you realized sometimes is overlooked. Is there some sort of business dynamic that you're trying to educate the organization about?
Yeah, the one for me at the moment is, I'll oversimplify things a little bit, but in these sorts of businesses, you have the new customers that you go out and you win. You have existing customers when they're with you, and then you've got, churn, and you're looking at retention metrics at the end. And I think in my experience, generally, organizations spend a lot of time thinking about new customers. Where are we going to find them? How are we going to market to them? How are we going to bring them through the funnel? A lot of time on new customers. I think where organizations spend a fair amount of time is thinking about things like retention and churn, and how are we going to make sure we keep our customers and the rest of it. I think what gets overlooked is when you have the customers, that middle part. And one of the things that I've been trying to bring is really looking at a lot of activity metrics. So, we can talk about how many new customers we're winning. We can talk about how many customers we have. We can talk about retention rates. But one of the most important things for me, and one of the biggest leading indicators about the health of a business, is what are your customers doing with you when they're there? And, we can get into things like net dollar retention rates and the rest of it. But I think a lot of it is almost more product-like in terms of the metrics that we're looking at to really understand whether people are using it. Because if people are using it, we'll figure out the other bits. We'll figure out how to monetize. We'll figure out how to make sure all of those other things flow through. But how do we really understand whether once a customer gets in, does it become that, toy that they play with every day and do something with? Or does it become the collectible that sits up on the wall that never gets touched and is only there to look at? We want to make sure people are using our products every day and using them the way we hope they're using them. And that to me has been a big push in having some of these monthly reviews and thinking about metrics that often get overlooked. How do we think about that activity piece?
We mentioned Typeform is your third tech company and your third UK company. You have three FP&A professionals, one from each of those firms, who just happened to meet one day. What are they going to tell us about Michael Bannon? He was demanding in what way? He put emphasis on this. He's known better for this than that. What would it be?
Yeah, I think what people would say would be that I've really tried to help create the context from which we can make the right decisions. So my hope would be that the people who've worked with me would say they understand the business and they understand our objectives and they understand how they tie to what we're trying to do better after having worked with me than before. I think as a leader, what I've tried to do is I've tried to give people that context to empower them to be able to go out and do their jobs and do their jobs better than they've done before. I think if you were to catch someone and say, well, how has this gone wrong or how does this not always work? I think when you give people context and you empower people, it's important for them and for you as the leader to be able to find out when they run into a blocker, when there's an impediment, when there's something where there might just be a little bit of help needed. And I think that's something that over time, I've made sure to work on as well, which is not just to say, hey, here's the context, here's the objective, here's what your responsibility is, now go. It's also been a lot more, how do we make sure that you don't get blocked along the way? And I think I've had to work on that part, but that's also brought people along on this journey.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We're up to our finance strategic moment question, where each episode we ask a finance leader to share a moment of insight that they've experienced along the way in their career. It might have happened 15 years ago. It might have happened last week, but it was a moment of insight that you experienced because of your unique lines of sight into the business. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
What comes to mind is, there are lots of them that happen almost every day. But I think, I'll share one example and I'll keep the company nameless. What I've tried to do when joining a company is, and this won't come as a surprise at this point, is really dig in and try and understand the business from the ground up. And so, what I will do is I will jump in and I will trace something back all the way to the source to understand how it works. And what I've done when I've joined each of these three companies is I've done this from day one. It's part of the reason why I don't believe very strongly in 90-day plans, because I think in the first 90 days, you're still figuring out the business and it's hard to jump in and say, this is what we're now going to go do. What I did at one of the companies I joined is I spent the first 3 months getting into the business. And I used that to then present to the board. Here's what I've learned. Here's my view of the business. And in doing that, I turned upside down a little bit the way that the company had reported previously. And, I said, I think we've been focused on the following set of metrics looking a certain way. I want to turn it around a little bit. And the way I turned it around was to look much more at the unit economics of things. So when you look in an aggregate, you start looking at things like growth rates and margin profiles and the rest of it. When you flip to looking at it in unit economics, you start to think more about, what is the transaction that we're facilitating? Where is the value creation moment happening? And what are we doing in terms of realizing value in that moment? And what we found was that the business was actually performing differently than we had all thought it was. And what it allowed us to do was say, aha, we've been making certain decisions on a set of assumptions about the way that we've been looking at the numbers. But we're now realizing that if you turn them around, we could end up making different decisions. And I think that was an important one for me, because what it allowed me to do is it allowed me to take a business and it allowed me to help people see it differently, to make decisions differently. And in keeping with the theme of our discussion, that allowed me to feel like I'd figure something out and had an impact. And for me, it was incredibly powerful to see how we used it from there to help the business do some things differently than it had done in the past in a very positive way.
From episode 893, this is 1 Minute with Craig Conti, CFO of Vera Mobility.
What I want the FP&A team to do is to be able to educate the operational and commercial leaders of the business what a return on capital actually looks like, right? What it means if you sell something and cannibalize something else. I want that common language to go across the business, and why that's so important as the business continues to scale. I want that to be a common vernacular that everyone in the company understands. Sometimes, even though we generate quite a bit of cash, of course, we're going to have to say no. And what I found is it's not good to be the wizard behind the curtain saying yes or no as things come. You need to explain to people why. These 10 things are a better return for the company and are better for our customers and their long-term health than these 10 things. And here are the metrics that help you understand that that's the case.
We're going to jump to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where I'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We begin with this question. Going back to the first time you stepped into the CFO office at Improbable, that first 60 days, there must have been a piece of advice you would have loved to have had as you stepped into the role very early on. If you could go back in time and give yourself that piece of advice today, what would it have been?
Take your time, and not to suggest that the goal of a CFO should be overly deliberate and should stretch things out. But take your time in the sense that when somebody steps into a role like this, either when the position has been vacant or when the position hasn't existed before, there are a lot of things that the organization wants and needs immediately. And, I think as part of my stepping into the role, I wanted to be that service provider to the rest of the organization. And one of the things I've learned is to press pause. Most decisions, if you take an extra little bit of time to make them, are not going to have a severe impact on your business. And you want to make sure you make them the right way, because they also do start to set precedent. They also do have impacts down the road. And so I think when I came in, I thought, wow, I'm now the person in the seat. I've got to get going. I've got to make decisions. The advice that I wish was given to me was take your time, understand how this works, make the right decisions for the long term. Don't make decisions today just because someone's banging on your door and asking you to make them.
I wanted to just quickly ask you about your title. You're a CFO, but you're also have the president title.
I have tried not to get too caught up on title, but what I've found is when the CFO title is your title, people look at you as the finance person. So the questions you'll get are, what's the finance view? What would finance say? And I think what I'm trying to create is it's broader than finance. A lot of what I'm doing is more business-like. And so the idea is to allow me to have that bigger impact in a way that isn't just finance, but is something more.
We'd like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side for us. We're wondering if you have a personal habit or part of a daily routine, something that sets you apart, something that people point to you and say, he's always done that. I'm not sure, but something that sets you apart. Anything?
I don't think this necessarily sets me apart. I would say two things. The first is, I will go to the source more frequently than some other folks. So what I really enjoy doing is, if we're looking at salary expense, I'll want to understand it by division. Once we get into division, I'll want to look across that division. I will click through and ultimately look at someone's employment agreement to make sure I can see how everything ties back together. So one would be that I probably go, very deep, and I do it in a way not because I'm not trusting of the numbers or because I'm questioning why something is done the way it's done. It's because it helps me understand. It helps me understand how many click-throughs you need to get to in order to get to that source information as we think about broader systems and architecture and ways of working. So that would be one. The other would be I spend a lot of time practicing, thinking. Conveying information like this is not something that always comes naturally to me. And what people might tell you is they have seen me staring or practicing or almost talking to myself to make sure that when I'm conveying this kind of information, presenting it in all hands, helping explain, at a board meeting why something has happened, there's a lot of practice that's gone into it.
We always like to ask for a book recommendation. Doesn't have to be a business book. It might be something you escape with, something that's just challenged your thinking maybe in one way or another. Anything come to mind for a book selection for us?
Yeah, one that I've read relatively recently that's not necessarily a finance book, but I liked quite a bit, was Reed Hastings' book, No Rules. And I'll tell you the reason why I liked it. I liked it because more than most other business books I've read, it's specific. It's specific about the situation. It will provide the details of what they were dealing with, and it will talk unapologetically about what they did. And I found with a lot of books about business, you often get very general types of guides around what you should be doing. And it's helpful. I mean, the interesting part to me, or an interesting part in that book for me, for CFOs, is they talk about expense policy. And they talk about the expense policy they put in place. They talk about the expense policy they put in place that didn't work, why it didn't work, and how they had to move to the next one. And so I've just found books like that really illuminating, because you can latch on to what they were dealing with in the room, and you can understand why they made the decision that they made and see when there are parallels to what you're doing in your own business.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We're up to our final question, where we're going to ask you to look forward finally. We'd like to know what your priorities are as CFO for the coming 12 months. What would be your priorities?
For us here at Typeform, we have a relatively new leadership team. And so, my big priority is to help make sure that we have our strategy and plan in place in a way that we understand, not just as a leadership team, but also as a company, to go out and accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. And it's lined up nicely for me because it's allowed me also, as a relatively new member of the team, to take what I'm learning about the business and bring that to the group in a way that we can use it to set that strategy and set that plan and set ourselves up for success.
Excellent. Michael Bannon, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks for having me, Jack. Appreciate it.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.